My name's Claude Hendrickson. I'm here from Chapeltown in Leeds. I suppose I would be representing in this the Leeds Caribbean and African Centre. Over 30 years ago, I was involved in self-build. And part of the reason I got involved in the self-build was because black young men, when it comes to housing, are at the bottom of the housing list. And there was a kind of myth going around that young black men were not interested in employment. You know, we just were lazy. You know, we just wanted to be on the streets, do it. And that as well, that black men weren't interested in construction. So we got together a group of us who were in bad housing, and we formed Frontline Self Build. So we went after, took us 5.5 years, jumping all the hurdles, crossing all the T's, dotting all the I's, to deliver a self-build where a group of us got construction skills. They built 12 houses, they laid 92,000 bricks, they laid 52,000 blocks, they built their own houses. What I then realized after we'd achieved that in the Caribbean or in Africa, where our people originate from, being involved in constructing your own house in some way, shape or form is the norm. It's, you know, you could be a school teacher in the Caribbean, you could be a police officer, you could be a fisherman, you could be even a young kid going to school. You'll come home, you'll push a wheelbarrow, you'll move blocks. It's part of our DNA. What interests me about cooperatives is that being of the first generation of black people children that was born in England, that the cooperatives model actually reminds me of how our parents used to set things up around need. So, for example, looking back over history, the system was not prepared for black people. So whether it was education, whether it was employment, whether it was housing, they weren't ready. So what happened, our parents' generation kind of got together around them separate issues. For example, housing. They couldn't afford to buy housing, so they created Pardna, so they could come together. And to me, that was a cooperative. Looking back, it's people cooperating around the issue. And so I think the black community have been involved in cooperatives since they came from the Caribbean, but it wasn't seen as cooperatives. It was just seen as black people just working together. And I think the cooperative movement in itself within Britain was maybe excluding black and ethnic minority communities because we didn't fit the models. So I think how I've levitated to cooperatives now, I realize that no matter what the label is on a strategy, it's all about people coming together around a common issue. So I see almost everything now as cooperatives, but they have different names. So for example, within the community-led housing sector, there's cooperative housing, there's self-build, there's co-housing, there is community land trusts, but all of them are the same in a fashion. They've just got different rules, little different snippets in their rule books, but they're all about people coming together around a common objective. So that's what's leaning me more to look at cooperatives. There's been many missed opportunities with this model. I think our parents' generation, because I have to look, when I look back at how our parents who came from the Caribbean integrated with them opportunities and how our generation can integrate within them opportunities. So I think there's great opportunities. I think the problem has been in the past that many of these networks would say black people were hard to reach and that's why we're not involved. And I would say, no, we've been easy to ignore over a long period of time. It's not that we're hard to reach. And I often say, if we were that hard to reach, how comes the police can find us really quickly? but that's my take on it. And I think, as one of my colleagues has said to me before, that even though the black community has allies within the white society, a lot of them actually acted as gatekeepers. So they would help black groups set up, they would be on the board, they'd be the treasurer, they'd be the chair, they'd be the officers, and the black people would just be the groups. What's happened now, we've come of age, and I think if there's enough training, because actually the issue is about knowledge and about training around how cooperatives work, what are structures, about training the chair, the treasurer, the board members. I think that's been the missing component. As black people, we come with a lot of passion, but we don't come with a lot of evidence. So we need to learn how to promote that evidence and put that on the table. So I think the missing part of the jigsaw this far is information about what is there and training. So that's an important thing. I think we need to get up to speed on the opportunities, and actually not so much the implications, but how you are held accountable for when you're involved in this sector, because you can get involved in this sector with friends and people you know, but there's no accountability, and we have to understand with this sector there comes accountability to the community in one breath and accountability to the funders. On the community level, just to give you an example, when we was set out to do the self-build, you know, we had people in the community saying, do you believe that white people, this was the argument, do you think white people are going to give money to black people to build their own houses? So that was a negative perception that they're never going to do it. I think that's one thing that is a barrier. Black people sometimes spend too long looking at how the system is going to try and block us and not come up with how we can achieve what we want. And sometimes our problem at a community level, we don't stick with it for long enough. Because for me, it took us from the initial idea, it took us 6 years before we actually got on site, but it only took us 18 months to build the houses. So that 6 years can be a barrier sometimes. Sometimes we want it now, we want it quickly, we want it to happen. The other barrier is that systematically, the system in the UK has a low opinion of black people, of our sense of achievements. So one barrier is you keep meeting people that will say to you, well, why do you want to do that? Why don't you just wait in the queue until they give you a house? Why do you want to do it for yourself? You know, so that's a barrier. You keep coming up against people that says, why are you even trying to do this? And then you have, even within the local authority, and this is a barrier that people that want to do community-led housing also have, but it's even more endorsed if you're a person of colour, is that it's not something. Britain has this, I've got this opinion that Britain has this attitude of, we'll do it for you. What, you know, we're in a queue. Why do you want to do things for yourself? You know, and so that's a barrier. And then you've got planning permission, you've got to find land, you've got to raise the finance. So for example, one of the biggest challenges when I was doing the self-build was the head of the housing association says to me, you need to go to the bank and negotiate £150,000 overdraft at the bank. There's me, this young guy, I was 29, I've now got to go to the bank and negotiate £150,000 overdraft. Now, what was I selling? I was selling a group of unemployed black men. It was really quite strange, and I did go through that process. I went to my local bank, who was quite supportive, but he didn't have the power. He could only okay me a £10,000 overdraft. He then directed me to the area branch manager in another bank. I had to go and speak to him. He could only okay me a £50,000 overdraft. Wow. So then he directed me to the regional bank manager, who I went and sat down and spoke with. And the regional bank manager thought, well, if the first one's referred you and the second one, I'm going to give you the opportunity to have the conversation. And after listening to me, he turned around, he says, go back to the council. And he says, tell the council that they should underwrite your project. Because if you start the project and your group fails and you break up, the council can just move in, finish building the houses, and they're going to rent them out. When you come in, you're seeming to go against the grain. You get what I'm saying? Because they don't want you to think that way. When black groups were trying to set up, they were always told to set up as charities. So that was the first wave of black organizations. Oh, set up as a charity. All of these other structures came later on, or they filtered through: cooperatives, co-housing, CICs, CIOs, community benefit societies. Originally, nearly every black group I knew was set up as a charity. So they were enlisted to the Charities Commission. These other structures have come out of the woodwork as time has gone on. So black people didn't know about them. And that's why, if you say to me 98% of all cooperatives are generally led by white people, some of them cooperatives will be in the name of black people, but they'll still be led by white people. I think seed funding is essential to getting black communities going, because a lot of the time people are doing it kind of off their own backs, and they're giving a lot of quality time. So some feed funding for that, for registration, even some money so they can open a bank account, and some basic things that groups need to make that first step. Registration at company house. An important thing is to determine which is the right structure for you. Is it a CBS? Is it a CIO? Is it a cooperative? Because the system has created there's different things that you can and can't do. For community wealth building, what I'd like to see is that we have some people in our community and nationally, individuals around the country that have lived experience, done it, got the evidence to prove it. Part of the missing link of this is that how do people that are advocates, because you can't do this advocacy on behalf of your community or even with your community unless you're being paid as well, because you can't do it for free. It doesn't work. What it does, it breaks you down. So I almost think it's about, to make wealth building happen, you have to identify individuals that have a track record and can prove a track record, proven evidence. I was once told by a council officer, when it comes to black people, we have a lot of passion. He says, passion is worth nothing. He says, what is worth something? You have your evidence. When you have your evidence, you sell your evidence with passion.